Welcome back everyone to the weekly Mailbox, your chance to ask me questions about absolutely anything you would like. Motorsports, Formula 1, Formula E, American racing, anything in between. Sorry for the slight delay. I think like most of us, I'm kind of getting confused with days of the week at the moment. So this is coming out on a Saturday, but it should have been yesterday. I put my hands up, my bad. Question number one is where we will start as always. It comes from SebiVet5. Is the Red Bull Junior system flawed or brilliant? Kvyat and Gasly are stuck at Red Bull, I think he means Toro Rosso, and Albon is yet to truly prove himself. Controversial. If Max left the team, would implode. Love your videos, hope you're keeping well. Thank you, SebiVet5. And it's an interesting one. Because we've seen in the past, I think, we'll start off this question with the early 2010s when we had Red Bull, Vettel and Webber. Vettel clearly the number one, Webber the clear number two. But Toro Rosso, although it had some competent drivers, Alguersuari, Buemi, Bourdais, who else did we have around that time? Verne and Ricciardo came in at the end of 2012, or for the 2012 season, and that's when things really started to change. But there was certainly a period of time, I would say probably from 2009 up until when Verne and Ricciardo came into the team, where there was no one quite of the standard of Red Bull, I would say. And although the likes of Buemi have gone on to some really impressive things in Formula E and WEC, I still think Webber and Vettel were clearly the right two at the Red Bull programme. I think then things got... And at that time, I think the Red Bull system was perfect because it gave the opportunity for a driver like Ricciardo to go up against someone like Jean-Eric Verne. A really good match, and I still think to this day Verne is criminally underrated in Formula 1 and should have had his chance, but it gave Ricciardo an opportunity to fight against another young hotshot. Ricciardo was the better of the two. Webber retired, which I think is a little bit different to what we're now seeing with the Red Bull programme, but Webber retired, so that was a clear opportunity for one of the youngsters to move up. When Vettel moved on, I still think they should have gone with Verne over Danny Kvyat, but Kvyat had done okay up against Jean-Eric, so he got the nod. And it's pretty much from there when Verstappen and Sainz came in, and well, for Verne also, Verne obviously wasn't going to get a move up to Red Bull anytime soon, so he had to be moved on, which is kind of a bit crazy considering some of the performances he was doing. I still think another team should have picked him up, but I'll leave Verne there for today. But then when Verstappen and Sainz came in, you've kind of got this dynamic where Kvyat's young at Red Bull, you got two youngsters in Toro Rosso that don't have much less experience than Danny Kvyat, and they're all fighting out over one seat. And Formula One's a sport where, as I said a couple of videos ago, there's statements saying you're only as good as your last race, and I don't quite believe that, but certainly you can go on a run of 5 or 6 races doing so well, and the rest of the season not perform. And Kvyat had those 2 races in Russia. Well, it was just pretty much just Russia and China, and even China he got a podium. He got demoted, Verstappen got moved up, and now we're in a situation a little bit like we had all the way back then when Vettel left the team. We've now got Ricciardo leaving the team and 3 drivers, again with Kvyat, but also Albon and Gasly, that all of them, I don't want to say don't deserve the seat, but I don't think any of them are clearly better than the other one. And I think with Kvyat in particular, I think he's someone that doesn't really want to spend the rest of his career at Toro Rosso. Gasly, likewise, I think he certainly proved, I think in his season and a bit, almost 2 seasons now, if you include that bit of 2017, he's been at Toro Rosso. I think he's deserving of a better drive, but then we saw at Red Bull, maybe the pressure was a little bit too much, but I still think Gasly has proved he's got the speed and is capable to do good things in Formula 1. And Albon, whilst I don't quite agree with your statement that he's not proved himself just yet, I kind of get the vibe you're going for in the sense that he is yet to get that podium. Up against Max Verstappen, well, the Webber-Vettel relationship really worked, and I could see a similar kind of thing happening with Max and Albon. So, does the Red Bull system work? Well, it's given us drivers like Vettel, like Ricciardo, like Verstappen. So from that point of view, it's amazing and can really find some absolute gems of Formula One drivers, but then it's certainly a very harsh programme to drivers like Verne, Kvyat, Gasly, that probably have the potential to do great things, but they want to keep finding that next superstar, and ultimately that's hurting drivers like Verne, like Kvyat, like Gasly. And just think now, if there was someone in Formula 2 that was ready to make that step up to Formula 1, that would be quite harsh to get rid of a Kvyat. So it's an interesting one, and it's one where, depending on who you're looking at from a Red Bull point of view, finding the likes of Verstappen, Sainz, he was one who slipped through the cracks, and a little bit like Gasly, I feel as a driver who's benefited getting out of that system. So again, it depends what point of view you're coming from. From drivers like Kvyat, which I feel are destined to stay at Toro Rosso, it's a little bit unfair, the system, but then it really can make sure that drivers are going up against, even Albon, he was up against Kvyat, a good standard, and they're able to prove themselves, and Red Bull can present opportunities for those that deserve them, if that kind of makes sense. So is it flawed? I think in a way, because Toro Rosso will never be as good as Red Bull, and those drivers, even though they got 2 podiums last year, or AlphaTauri now, I probably should mention, even though they're an okay team, they're never going to be world champions. So is it flawed? A little bit. It's definitely a very strict program, and I think that probably doesn't help its reputation. But I also think it's a bit of brilliance as well. From a Red Bull perspective, it's fantastic. From a more HR perspective, it's a little bit brutal. And I'll probably leave that there for question 1. I've spent a little bit of time on it, but it's a really interesting story, and one that I will definitely focus on in the future again. Moving to question 2 comes from Zenora. How can we get everyone to agree on the same chassis and engines, kind of like Formula 2? That hopefully would make Formula 1 more fair and more fun to watch. Do you think that would be possible? Thank you, dude, for your question. You've been posting some awesome ones over the last few weeks, but I try and pick from different people and not have the same person on every single week, but I like this one. And it's that kind of debate, again, whether Formula 1, and obviously with the whole crisis going on at the moment, whether going towards a Spec series is the right thing or not. And a little bit like the last question, without avoiding what I truly think too much, it's one of those ones where you're going to be on either side of the fence. A Spec series, what you're going to get there, and Formula E I always use as an example as a Spec series. It's not quite a Spec series, but it's pretty close. And it's probably as close as Formula 1 would ever get. But what you get in there, like you mentioned in your question, is closer racing, more variety. You're going to have more driver input, where it's going to be... So let's take Lance Stroll. He always does really well at Monza for whatever reason, but then he's not so good, let's say, at Silverstone. So if you're all in the same cars, Stroll maybe could be a favourite for a podium at Monza, but not Silverstone. So you're going to get a little bit more variety thrown in there. But I don't think that's what Formula 1 is. And that's kind of my 2 cents on it, in that Formula 1, although, and I love the driver element, and that's a fantastic part of it, and I definitely think it needs to be more of a part of it, make more of an impact than it currently does, and I'm hopeful that 2022 is going to be able to bring that. However, the engineering side of it is also a massive factor, in the sense that if you go to a Spec series, and this is kind of how Formula E have worked around it, is that manufacturers make their own powertrains, and that can help their electric vehicles for road use and normal public use. But for Formula 1, this is manufacturers proving they are the best. So Mercedes, this hybrid era has done wonders for them on a commercial side of things. And if you're all given the same car, the same engines, there's no need for a Ferrari to be up against a Mercedes. It can just be any name above the door. And for a team like Williams, that's fantastic. But then you're going to lose that motoring, engineering side of it. You're not going to need as big a team as engineers. You're not going to get the likes of Adrian Newey that are just making tiny little tweaks, bending those rules slightly to make extra advantages. And I'm sure if they went more of a Spec route series, you're still going to have that to a degree, but you're never going to get a double diffuser You're never going to get Ferrari and Mercedes like last year going, and even Red Bull going 3 different crazy concept of car and yet all winning Grand Prix. You're never quite going to get that. So I understand the testament that we want closer racing. We want drivers to make the impact. But I think we also have to be careful that we don't push away teams because we're taking away the engineering side of things. And there's certainly, again, although I'm interested in the driver element, there's certainly fans out there that are more interested in the engineering side of things. And I totally respect that. And I think it's a part of Formula One we would be silly to get rid of. So yeah, I think that's pretty much my thoughts on that one. So we'll move on to question number 3 from Glenn Robertson. Why is it that you think the whole Formula E grid will turn up to a sim race, but only a few Formula One drivers? I can answer this one pretty quickly, but I thought it was quite a fun one, because if you're not aware, Formula E has started the Race at Home Championship, and I really like what they've done, because they've laid out a full championship. They're doing it for a great cause, UNICEF. And even in the practice round, they had, I think it was 21 of the 24 drivers. Now we're in the proper season, they've got all of them, which is great. But it's frustrating that Formula One can only get 6 drivers. But already, I'm seeing big differences with I don't think this is really the fault of the driver, but more Formula E is very much, we're aware we're not going to be racing for a while, and Formula E logistically is much harder to put on than Formula One, because Formula E is in the city. They have to literally close off roads, where Formula One can go to a circuit out of town, no spectators. Formula E, even if you say no spectators, you're still right in the heart of a city. So and I'm going to do a video update next week or the week after, talking about what Formula E is doing at the moment. But they've pretty much cancelled the rest of the season for the moment. So they're aware they're not going to be racing for a long time. So they've been very quick, like they always are, at making contingency plans. They've got it in place, a championship on the line, which makes a big difference, for charity as well, which is definitely going to appeal to some of the drivers doing their part. And so with that all together, they've got a season ahead. They've got, I think it's 12 rounds, including the practice round we've had already. And it's a bit of fun. And the drivers are aware of that, I think. And I haven't caught too much of it myself. I'll hold my hands up. But what I have seen, it's been utter carnage. But again, they're aware it's a bit of fun. Formula One haven't outlined a championship. We kind of show up to each weekend and they just, announce a random Grand Prix that's going to be on that particular Sunday evening. I think they do it. And there's no real aim for a championship. It's just who wins on the night, which is, again, a bit of fun, but there's no, charity element to it, so drivers are not necessarily more inclined to do it. The Verstappen argument is that they're not used to the Formula One game, whereas Formula E has done an R Factor 2, and there's a whole host of different things that add up to it. But I certainly think Formula One is taking a more laid-back approach, because they're hoping to get actual racing back on the road again. What are they aiming for now? Is it July? June? End of June, early July is what they're going for. So I think a lot of the drivers are trying to bear that in mind, that they're going to be racing hopefully in a couple of 3 or 4 months' time, whereas Formula E don't necessarily know they have it even for the rest of this year. So yeah, I certainly think that aspect of it being more formal, more structured, is why drivers are joining the Formula E one, but Formula One, it's more advertised as a casual, fun, almost mess about session, is what I will go with. Moving on to question 4, and again, I enjoy the events, but I can understand why some drivers don't necessarily want to take part. But question number 4 comes from Mimicking Sports. Does Lewis Hamilton match up to the likes of Michael Schumacher and Jim Clark? Controversial, but bear with me. If he wins another title, in my opinion, not, because he does not have that epic race where he climbs up the field that many other greats have had. Now, that is what you call a hot take, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm obviously not going to put this to title, because that's going to be the most clickbaity mess I have ever seen. I disagree with this sentiment. And at the bottom of the question, if you didn't catch it, I always do like a little title, and I've put the generation game, and that's pretty much where my mind instantly went with this question, because you can't really judge drivers from generation to generation. Jim Clark, teams were all over the place in the sense that you had Lotus that he was driving for, were a top team. Ferrari, McLaren, I think came around in the late 60s, so maybe a bit after Jim Clark's time. I should probably know my history better there. However, you also had teams at the very bottom of the grid, like Eagle, that I've never heard of until I did a research for the USA Grand Prix history. Teams that you never heard of, but are so far behind, they're practically not even in the Grand Prix. You then go to Schumacher, where Ferrari dominance was so big. Now we have Mercedes dominance, which is also as huge. But then you've got, again, I'll compare Jim Clark to Hamilton a little bit. I don't like to do it, but safety was appalling back then. Safety is much better in the times that Lewis Hamilton is driving, but the cars are much harder to overtake. The driver himself cannot have as much an impact. Look at Monaco. I always look at Monaco. Every year, people now say it's boring every single year. And I sometimes think, why is that? Well, in the 90s, in the 2000s, the driver stand, I'm not saying it's worse. The cars were a little bit harder to drive, but you'd often see several cars in the barriers. Now, I show up to a Monaco Grand Prix not really expecting anyone on race day to find themselves in the barriers. So much has changed, and I think a race through the field now, with dirty air, with the cars being so wide, is so much harder. So the fact that you say Hamilton hasn't had an epic race from the back to the front, again, I think's a bit unfair, because we certainly have had races where Hamilton has started at the back or has had a first lap incident, has worked his way up towards the front. Off the top of my head, this is going to be painful one. Was it 2015 Silverstone, where his tyre broke out or delaminated and got back up to the front? I think it was 2015. Might have been 2014 when Rosberg retired, but that was one that jumps to my mind. I don't know if he won on that particular occasion. I think he might have. Germany 2018 started, I think it was 14th. Bit of rain in the air, worked his way through the field. And again, modern cars are much harder to overtake. So it's impossible to compare Clark to Hamilton. But what you can say, and what I always say, is in our current generation, Hamilton has proved to be the best driver. You do not win 6 world titles without being a little bit good. And it's always a trap, these kind of questions, because people are always going to say there's no way he's anywhere near as good. But there's no denying that of this current generation, he is one of the best, if not the best. And can you compare him? Not really, but you can certainly say Hamilton was the best of his era, like Clark was, like Schumacher was, if that makes sense. And we'll move on to audience participation before I dig myself a hole too big in today's mailbox. Comes from Matt66. Name the best 5 drivers to have never won a championship between 2000 and 2019. Audience participation, I forgot to mention it. If you would, audience participation, I want to know your thoughts. In the comments down below, I want to know your 5 best drivers to never win a championship between 2000 and 2019. I'm going off the top of my head here, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some. I would love to put Grosjean on this list. 10 podiums, but still yet to get a victory. The one I certainly think is good enough to win a title and is yet to do so, Max Verstappen. That's an easy one. Easy one. I really do think he is becoming a very special driver indeed. I kind of want to put Bottas on the list. I think he's criminally underrated, but maybe that's more of an outsider thought. Heinz-Harald Frentzen, we're going a little bit too far back now, I guess, and he was more the late 90s, I believe, where he was really putting the grips on some of those other guys. But I'll put Verstappen, Frentzen, David Coulthard. I do love DC. I'll put David on the list. I think people would want me to say Mark Webber. I don't know if he was quite on the level with Vettel. I think the way Vettel was able to assert himself as number one makes me question that a little bit. But I will say Felipe Massa, certainly, I mean, we all know what happened in 2009, and the driver that came back was certainly not quite on the level of that 2008 Felipe Massa was awesome. So I'll throw Massa on the list. And do I squeeze in Bottas? I'm going to put in Ricciardo instead. I think Ricciardo... who was it that did a video the other week? I think it was the F1 debate show. It was them. They did what would Formula 1 be like without Mercedes, and they took away Mercedes from the list. And Ricciardo was almost a triple world champion, I think he was. So, yeah, that's a bit of a rough list, and I'm missing out drivers like Fisichella, Trulli, again, Grosjean, Bottas. I think I'm going to be missing drivers. People are going to be screaming at me. Sainz, Norris, Hulkenberg. But yeah, so what have we gone with there? Verstappen, Ricciardo, Frentzen, Coulthard, and Massa. Oh, and Montoya. Oh, I want to put Montoya on the list. Who takes the L? I could be here for days. So our final list. Verstappen, Ricciardo, Frentzen, Massa, Montoya. DC, I'm sorry, you've got the job. That is my list. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Quickly, before we go, this evening, we are back. F1 Open Lobbies over on the Twitch. 8 o'clock the stream will start. And if you want to get involved, if you've got an Xbox, Xbox Live, 2019 game, join the lobby. Open to everyone. It's a street circuit special tonight. Full damage, 5 laps. It's going to be carnage. There's going to be tears. I cannot wait. So if you're interested in that, want to join, have a bit of fun for a couple of hours, feel free to do so. I'll be back a little bit later on next week. Got an exam in the middle of the week, so I've changed the schedule slightly. So that'll be out on Monday on the community page. Oh, I think that's everything. If you've got a question for next week's video, comment section, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. Like, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.